Some of the testimony at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry into State Capture about the SABC today. Thandi Smith is the head of the policy unit at Media Monitoring Africa, an organisation that has been monitoring the situation at the SABC for some time. She joins us now by Skype. Thandi, good evening to you. Various things coming out of the testimony today. Perhaps one of the most startling was about Hlaudi Motsoeneng, Krivani Pillay, explaining to the Commission that he said then President Zuma had to be treated with respect so other people could be asked questions, but President Zuma at the time could not. What does that tell us about what was happening at the SABC?
Hi, good evening. So what I think we're seeing, what's been highlighted during an inquiry is an absolute it's clear that it wasn't just an institution that was captured. It's an institution where there was a clear, insidious editorial agenda being actively pursued. We see, an absolute demolition of good governance, of accountability structures, and complete disregard for fair labor practice, as well as an absence of, ethical conduct and, to be honest, a totalitarian approach to governance. And this is being heard throughout the testimony that we're hearing from Kriv, from Footer, and from Thandeka.
When we listen to all of this, one of the instructions given by Hlaudi Motsoeneng was to ban the coverage of the economic freedom fighters. It was actually just before an election. By any measure, that presumably is interference.
Absolutely. And I think, the other instances that we're hearing about the editorial interference just shows how deep the interference was running through the newsrooms. But again, it's not the first time we're hearing this. With this kind of statement and this evidence has been coming out in various forms, in various inquiries, as well as various reports and things. But again, re-listening to all of this just solidifies what we know and what we've seen happening to the institution over the last few years.
There's been an illustration of various incidents. One of them that might have been important at the time was testimony that a manager at the SABC told Thandeka Gcubule-Mbeki not to explain the link between the firing of Nhlanhla Nene as finance minister, this was in December 2015, you remember, and the impact of that on the rand. It would seem that in some cases there was almost a sort of quite a calculated attempt to control coverage.
Well, again, it's yet another instance of editorial interference, but also of political interference. And it's also something that we've seen come out in various forms of the evidence over the last few years. And so, again, it's not just the editorial interference around, basic content decisions, but a clear, deliberate strategy to control the institution. And we're seeing attempts at those kinds of efforts continuing today.
There's also been testimony about the climate of fear, and I'm talking about threats that were made against people. Does this cross the line into criminality, in your view?
Well, yes. To be completely honest, the threats and intimidation that we have seen against various SABC journalists, the people who are responsible have not been held accountable. So, when we talk about threats and intimidation, especially with journalists, it's not something that's unique to the SABC. It's a problem that the journalist industry has across the world. And so when we look at a public broadcaster that has a particular public interest mandate, these issues become even worse. They're even more stark, and we need to protect the institution and the people that work for it.
There's also a human story to this. Some of the testimony today is about journalists sitting in their car crying uncontrollably because of just the most incredible pressure that was placed upon them.
Well, yes, and we know of the story of Suna Venter, who did pass away. And although her death wasn't directly linked, the stress and the pressure and the conditions that she was working under undoubtedly contributed. And that's just one example of the kind of environment that journalists were working under.
This has painted a picture of a very difficult time at the SABC. How do you see the SABC now? How would you describe the situation at the South African Broadcasting Corporation at this moment in September 2019?
Well, it's terrifying to think that all of this was only 3 years ago. And to look at the institution and see the stark differences is unbelievable. I think that that's quite spectacular that the institution is still running, and the coverage that we saw coming out of the election period was commendable. So even though, like you say, the institution is coming out of a very dark period, we have seen an institution that's been able to turn itself around. But what we do see, and what's profoundly ironic, is that the efforts to turn around the institution aren't currently being threatened. And we need to work towards that not happening.
Thandi Smith from Media Monitoring Africa, Head of Policy there. I do appreciate the time. Thank you very much indeed.